Peace and blessings, family, and welcome to Labors of Love podcast. We are here to inspire, uplift, and enlighten. Each episode, we will be hearing from Black midwives, doulas, and other traditional childbirth supporters who have dedicated their lives to being of service to Black mothers and families in all aspects of the motherhood journey. This evening, I have the privilege of speaking with Dasia Gant, a holistic birth coach. It is her sole mission to spread the word to Black families that birth and parenthood can be beautiful, healing, and transformative. She accomplishes this mission in two ways. The first way is by personally prepping families to be physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually prepared for the journey. The second way is that she connects Black families with other Black birth professionals online through her platform, Black Birth Pros. When she's not busy supporting families and with Black Birth Pros, you can find her living in Georgia, spending time with her man and her beautiful 3-year-old daughter. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome. Peace and blessings, family.
Hey,
Thank you for joining us this evening, Daisha.
thank you for such a beautiful introduction.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we're gonna just jump right in. I know I don't have you for a long time, and we want to just engage with the audience because there's so much value that you bring, and there's so much information you have to share. So I'm gonna jump right in.
Awesome.
Prior to your first birth or your experience as far as the work that you do, what was your understanding from the childhood up until around
Mhm.
pregnancy, childbirth, labor, delivery, all of those things?
So I think like a lot of people, unfortunately, a lot of people's first experience with the word birth or the connotation of it is surrounded in fear and trauma and scary stories and you have no direct link to it, right? So, like as a child, you haven't actually firsthand experienced that, but you have the TV shows that are really super dramatic and the water breaks and we need to hop in the ambulance type of thing. And so, um, I've never seen birth until my own birth. So prior to my own pregnancy and prepping for my birth experience, that was just it. I had societal understanding of what it meant to be pregnant and to prepare for birth, which was again a lot of fear, a lot of words around pain, and you just need to get through it type of thing. And it's beautiful on the other side, but fear, danger, a lot of negative,
Right.
plenty of negative, and there was no other side of the coin. And so coming into pregnancy, that's what I had on my plate was like, now where do I start? If I don't want this to be my experience, but this is all I've ever known,
Mhm.
what am I supposed to do with this?
Right, right. And I mean, I just hear that all too often that, myself included, that really we don't talk about this. We don't talk about it at all. And we absolutely don't talk about it enough, that there is a whole understanding that we're disconnected from around what this process is, what this experience is like, or what it can be. And
Mhm.
how do we even connect to that information? So for you, coming into your experience, how did you acquire that knowledge? Was it beforehand? Was it after the experience that you really came into the understanding of how you view birth now?
Mhm. So even though I had like mainly negative knowledge of things, I feel like I had at some point heard the word midwife. And
Okay.
so when I became pregnant, I was active duty at the time. And so active duty life and the way healthcare works is kind of like, here are your options. You don't really get this vast, I want to go pick who I want to pick. It's like, here are your people you need to pick from. That's what you got to pick from. Luckily, there were options on there. So there were OBs on there were obstetricians, but then I saw midwife and I saw two midwives. And I was like, I kind of remember this word. Let me dig deeper. And so right off the bat, I did choose a midwife for my care. And so um, that was my first step into like a more positive experience where I had my initial prenatal and just got that really caring, genuine, let's talk about what you're experiencing vibe where it seemed like the person genuinely cared about my experience as an individual and where I didn't feel like I was just another number walking through. And so definitely my own pregnancy sent me on a rabbit hole of like, okay, this is a midwife. Okay, this can happen in the hospital. Okay, and so I started piecing things together and I actually ended up planning my own home birth. So started with the in-hospital midwife and then found out there was a home birth provider in my local area and ended up switching probably at 26 weeks pregnant. So I was halfway through my pregnancy when I was like watching a YouTube video. So watching a YouTube video, watch this Black woman have her home birth, beautiful home birth with her midwife, learned what a doula was through that YouTube video. And I was just like, this is what I want. So it was like through my pregnancy, piecing together things. And luckily, that was my experience of bumping into things. But I know that's not everybody's experience. They, again, bump into the negative stuff. And then during pregnancy, it can be a really, it can like 9 months can feel like, oh, 9 months. And then 9 months can feel like, oh, I don't have a lot of time.
Right.
And there's so much. And that's like a really hard time to start learning about your options if you've never heard that you can give birth at home before, because now you're needing to not just learn things, you're needing to deconstruct and unlearn a lot of stuff to get to the point of saying, okay, I want to give birth to my baby at home.
Yes. Yes. No, that is so valuable and just really hit home because you're absolutely right. Now we're in this vulnerable space. Now, like you
Mhm.
said, 9 months can seem like 9 months, or it can seem like 9 months. Like, how do
Mhm.
I get all of this together and plan all of these things? How do I make the right choices? What are the right choices?
Yeah.
So that is significant, and just this understanding of what our options are. So you mentioned that you were active duty at the time of your
Yes.
pregnancy. So
Mhm.
was that a very different experience than how you may have witnessed, or if you had any other experiences outside of that setting?
So very different. So I've always been military. I grew up as a military child. My dad was in the military for 20 years. And so my whole life experience has been military, but from what I've known, being on the inside and then being like looking on the outside of civilian life, as we call it, I know that people have more options. You're not locked into here's your network. You have more options. And so I knew that I had limited options with my provider. So even with choosing the home birth midwife, they weren't covering it. So TRICARE is the medical provider for the military. TRICARE, at least where I was at, they were not covering home birth care. And so that was an out of pocket expense that me and my husband had not accounted for until, again, halfway through their pregnancy, that we're like, okay, we're going to choose home birth, but this is not covered by the military. And so
Mhm.
not only am I making a choice where, okay, I still have an option, but like this is coming out of our pocket to choose this option. And that's not always the case for people.
Oh, right.
Hmm.
Wow, wow. So, how did your experience in your labor and delivery process, and what you learned along the way, how has that motivated your path and your journey to be of support to other mothers and now other doulas, and really to create what you've created?
So it's a funny, I say a funny story because we can't control birth. So as much as I prepared, as much as I did my research, learned my options, hired the home birth midwife, hired the doula, went to childbirth education, my birth still ended up being a hospital transfer. And so it was a non-emergent reason. My daughter's heart rate, the midwife was saying, was kind of like, uh, was she saying it was maybe decelerating? Like just her heart tones were looking a little funny. I
Okay.
had been laboring for a while at home really peacefully, but it was just one of those situations of like, I think we need to get some more eyes on this, get a little, another monitoring. And I was okay with that decision. But up until that point, pretty much crossing the threshold of the hospital space is when, again, what comes with the territory of being in a system that is designed to run the way that it runs, it's not really designed for autonomous what do you say you want type of birth. And so, as much as I prepared, I still had a very traumatic birth experience. Long story short, without all the details, a part of why my experience was traumatic, the epidural that I chose to receive, the anesthesiologist ended up misplacing it about 6 to 8 times. And so,
During
just
active labor.
people already freaking out about the needle itself, right? Like, some people trying to avoid it at all costs. So, not just I've gotten this one time, but where this doctor who's supposed to know what he's doing has now stuck me in my back repeatedly. And so just some of the details in that situation. I know a lot of people's their own birth experience, positive or negative, sometimes brings them into like, oh, this is really why I want to do this work. Either I want other people to experience the beautiful thing I experienced, or sometimes the negative part of I don't want anybody to ever experience that. And so I will admit part of my own experience was, okay, this shouldn't be happening. What can I do about it? But something I share with birth workers now is like, that's valid. Our experience is valid. It's a part of our story. I don't shy away from sharing it, but even that has to be checked before we come into the work where we're not bringing our own unprocessed trauma into the next birth experience. Because now, if I'm supporting a family who is preparing for home birth and they need to transfer to the hospital, I can't tell them, no, nope, don't do that, right? Because it's not my experience. And so definitely I will say my own birth really showed me just ways in which I don't think I prepared is what I will say. I thought I had did all the things to prepare, but I don't think the way in which I show up now for other families with that kind of the healing work. I didn't do my healing work. So I prepared physically. So I got the home birth supplies, got birth tub set up, do all the exercises, do the mile circuit, like do everything I need to do physically. And I didn't really fully check in. How am I emotionally? And where am I at really mentally? And am I spiritually in tune with like intuitively checking in with myself and my baby in this experience? And I know I didn't do that work. And just the healing work, like ancestral work, where what am I carrying that's maybe not my own? Like, what am I prepared for in this lifetime, but what am I holding on to from lifetimes ago that's impacting this experience? And I didn't know that part. And so while I love my doula, who I had dearly, I was living in North Dakota. And so I didn't have my range of options of doulas who look like me to
Right.
be mentioning, hey, here's this other piece of the puzzle that we might do to prepare for birth. It was just like, here are the practical steps that we take. And so again, the way that I show up for families now, where it's not just let's learn about birth, let's do the physical things. It's really like, I know you may not have heard this before, but we're gonna have to broach different territory to talk about healing that part that you might not even understand, that one thing that might be the difference between your experience shifting. And so again, long story short, I did all the practical preparation. I don't feel like I did a piece. Can I say I don't like to do the what if game. Maybe if I did this and did that, would it have changed? But definitely, I love the decisions I made nonetheless. I never look back at it and say, oh, I wish I would have just been in the hospital. I'm like, no, I love that I made my choice, and going forward, I will still choose home birth every
Mm,
single time.
mm. I think that's beautiful and powerful what you were saying, just especially in reference to from a birth worker perspective of like having to really somewhat take your ego out of it or your whatever you might be holding on to or bringing into the experience so that you can truly hold space in a non-biased way.
Right.
And what you speak of as far as it being a holistic, and I like that term that you use because that to me, and maybe, just to educate others of that full mind, body, and spirit. Like it's not, like you said, just the physical, because yes, it's
Mhm.
almost like preparing for a marathon, but the psychological and the mental aspect of it is just as, if not maybe more so important. as being physically prepared for this experience.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, I think that's phenomenal. So, how does that shape, your practice and the services that you provide? Like, what does that look like for those who, are interested in finding out more about you?
Ooh, it just looks so different now. I showed up into the work supporting families in the way that I was taught. So going through doula training with the organization I chose at the time, I didn't even know there was so many different organizations who had different core values and beliefs and central missions. It was just like, okay, here's this doula training that's coming into town. But the way in which I was trained was the kind of what I call like your cookie cutter way, which if anybody practices in the way, this is no shade. This is just we were all taught of you meet with a client, have your interview, show up and do two prenatals, do continuous labor support, and then follow up maybe 1 to 2 times postpartum. And I kind of followed that way for a few births before I was like, mm,
Okay.
and so the way I show up now looks way different. Even when I was showing up then, it was kind of, again, the cookie cutter way of, okay, let's go through your options and let's create a birth plan and let's talk about labor positions, which are all part of the equation. But again, keyword, like they're part of the equation. And so now I don't even jump into birth stuff with my families. I think it catches some people off guard. I don't even jump into like, let's start planning for the birth.
Mhm.
I jump into exactly the first question that you asked me, which is, um, first, tell me more about you, but really like tell me what comes up for you when you hear the word birth or when you think of birth. Like what are the words that come up for you? What are the phrases? And starting there before I start what I call information dumping. I don't information dump on people of all the beautiful things that I think I know in information. I'm like, we need to set a baseline. Like we need to start with really reframing the idea of what you have about birth to again like unlearn some things before we start stacking, before I start telling you anything. And so it just looks like a lot more introspection that I'm doing with people, a lot more reflection, a lot more of them asking, a lot more of me asking people questions than me telling them things. So I'm an educator at heart, and I feel like I really love sharing information. But the way I approach this is way different than I initially did. It's way more work, what I call transformative, because people really come on the other side, not just on the other side of birth with the beautiful new baby, but like asking themselves questions that they've never thought to ask themselves, or really taking ownership and asking themselves like, well, why don't I feel comfortable taking control of this? And maybe it's not just about the birth, like, do I need to check these other areas in my life and how to communicate better with this person? And so it's just this really big transformative work that I can't put words to, but it's just way deeper now than let's just prepare for the birth. I'm like, I don't want to just prepare for the birth. We need to talk first. Like we need to talk a little bit and have some conversations.
That is beautiful. 'Cause I truly feel like the experience, regardless of, how the intricate details of it, but the experience alone, transformative is absolutely a term that I use, but it feels like an initiation of sorts. Like
Mhm,
you are absolutely changed on
mhm,
all levels, coming out of the experience. So, I
mhm,
mean, I find such value in that and your approach to it because again, that messaging, that programming that we get early on, even on a subconscious level, we don't know how it's
mhm,
impacting the decisions that we make and what may not even be comfortable, but is familiar just because
mhm.
of that's the way we think it's supposed to be.
Right,
So really tapping into their understanding and like you said, it's education, and I
right,
find that that empowerment is what truly allows for decisions to be made that's in the best interest of the birthing person and their family. So
right.
that is amazing. So how has your practice shifted, or if it has, with this whole new virtual space that we find ourselves in?
Oh, it has absolutely shifted. So when I was still in the military, after I transitioned out, we were living in North Dakota. So we were clear across the map. I'm in Georgia now. Clear
Yeah.
across the map. literally the frozen tundra where it
Ooh,
gets to like -20, -30, like literally look at your phone and it's saying something crazy. Um, and so we were there in a very small town, and there was only one hospital in our local area. And that one hospital, throughout the beginning of the pandemic, starting so March 2020 on through into the beginning of 2021, maybe even further, they were just like, no, like this is what it is. We have this one visitor rule, and just very like a lot of, so nothing special, right? Like there was like a lot of places around the country. But even when North Dakota in particular, like the numbers were low, or when it was like, hey, we have these specific doulas in the community, like it's a tight knit community. Can we have protocols in place that, okay, the doulas follow these procedures. We test, like, can we do something? Can we compromise? And it was just like, no. And it was
mm,
very clear that there was a little more to it than just COVID. Like, it was a little more to the
okay.
situation and how it was beneficial to the hospital to not have the doulas in the room to slow down and ask questions, and how it was more beneficial to, like, let's keep essentially the factory line moving along. And so I wasn't let in. It was crazy. It was really when I was ready to jump into the work, because I took my doula training when my daughter was 2 months old. And so I wasn't quite ready to be supporting family. So I had this great knowledge, but I waited until she was maybe close to one, if not past one, before I was ready to actually jump in. I'm ready to support families and be on call. But right when I was like, I'm ready to jump in, that's when we're in lockdown, everything's shutting down. And I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do now if the way in which I was taught in this traditional way I can't do? Like, am I supposed to sit on my hands and see things unfold? Which numbers are coming out now in the statistics showing that, like worse birth experiences and like the statistics being higher for C-section, like the numbers are clearly showing that things have been impacted. And so I
Through
felt
the
that at that
pandemic.
time. Yes.
Okay.
So during the pandemic, things were happening, things that I could feel that now the numbers are showing of like families are going in with their partner. Maybe they took some type of class to prepare, maybe they didn't. The
Right.
numbers are clearly showing that like C-sections rose, inductions rose, like negative birth experiences were happening. And so I felt that at that time of, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to not do anything and just wait until we're just let back into the hospital? And so I chose no. What is going to happen right now? How can families still prepare? How can they still feel some sense of comfort during the situation where it doesn't have to be an all or nothing, kind of in the way I was shown of like, doula work is physical touch, it is being present, it is this way. And so I'm like, it can be those things, and those are the beautiful things. And I love to feel the physical presence in a room with somebody and to be able to provide that physical touch. But I'm like, that's not all that I do. I had to tell myself that and remind myself, I'm like, that is not the only thing that I do in this equation.
Mhm.
And so I started exploring what it could look like to support people online. Like, what does virtual doula work? Like, it sounds crazy pre-pandemic. It's like, what is a virtual doula? But
Okay.
what does it look like to support somebody online? And how do you really get them to a place of feeling like they are prepared, and that they know the things, and that regardless if in the room or not, knowing that I have impacted their experience. And
Mhm.
so I think my wheels were turning on how to bring things online before the pandemic, just being a mom of a really tiny baby and not really having that family support around. But definitely pandemic hit, and I'm like, it's a necessity, not just because of I have this passion, but I'm like, families need the support. And I can't do the all or nothing of like, well, if I can't physically touch you, there's no value, because that's not true. And I have seen it for a fact and been working with families online. I haven't been to a birth in person since 2020, actually. So I've
Okay.
been supporting families online, and I have seen, have been told, have been shown the power of what it means to be a doula. Like, for me to define what it means to be a doula and to provide that support where people come out and say, it did impact my experience, and I
Mhm.
had a beautiful birth, and I learned the things, and I got to ask myself these questions. And so the work I do has completely shifted but I love it so much. I love it so much.
Yes. So, how did that come to um, the idea and the creation of Black Birth Pros?
Ooh, so Black Birth Pros was actually started more so because as I started to shift the way that I was showing up and working with families, and talking a little more on social media, so being a little more having open Q&As or different
Mhm.
things, workshops I was doing for free. I had other birth workers in my DMs, like on Instagram, like, well, can you tell me more about this? Or what do you think about that? And so I had a lot of questions, and I really, what it started was not wanting to mix the platforms. I'm like, okay, I'm talking to expectant families right here. I'm going to talk to birth workers over here. So Black Birth Pros really started as a platform to help other birth workers with like the essentially the business side of birth work. Like, how do you get in front of families? How do you promote yourself online? What does it look like to call yourself a virtual doula? Like, what do you do when you're online with the family, and how do you create that transformation? And so it really started as me sharing what I've been doing with other people, and then it kind of turned into, I don't even know where these families would find me at, but somebody would DM me, a family, and they're like, I'm in Arizona and I'm looking for a doula. Do you know somebody, or can you connect me? And I'm like, well, yeah, I do know people because I've made this platform. And so it's kind of been like, I haven't had it on the forefront as like a directory, but in the background, I've just been connecting people. And it's kind of turned into connecting Black families with Black birth workers, where now I'm like, okay, let me actually get serious about this and let me make this a thing because I have people asking. So it's kind of morphed and transitioned into something more than what I've started and created to be. So not just the business side of birth work, but okay,
Mhm.
let's make this a channel that people can actually connect through. And now I'm kind of teaching people my actual framework that I take families through to create transformation in their birth experience. And so that's exciting for me because I've been kind of holding it close, and I'm like, this is like this is my thing that I worked really hard to create. But I'm like, how much more impact can happen if other birth workers know how to create impact, regardless if they're in the room or not with families?
That is just, I mean, that is so impactful and significant. Just the last 2 minutes of what you said, because that connection is so valuable. And I know, even based off of the statistics and how we, move the needle on the maternal morbidity, a lot of representation is everything. And to have someone in the space that looks like you, that have some shared experiences so that they can, be more empathic to what it is that you're experiencing, there is such great value with that resource of being able to tap into a central location, especially when you have all of these other things that you have to put into place and figure out
Hmm.
when you're in the midst of, prenatal and
Hmm.
planning and all of those things, that whole shift and transition. So that is extremely valuable. And again, just what you're doing from the transformative perspective, the holistic aspect of it, it is absolutely more than just a role that's filled. It's a calling.
Yes.
It's a divine purpose to be a support, to bring life forth. It's
Yes.
just like there's not too many things that are more significant as far as to a people than
Yes.
that experience of birth. So I truly commend you for, your story and the work that you're doing and creating spaces to continue these dialogues and to connect people and to be that support and something to have an example of. So the time goes by so fast. Like I
I
feel like
know. I know. I know it.
absolutely want people to know how to get in touch with you. I'm going to put your information in the description as well, but please share what the best way to get in touch with you is.
Yeah, so whether you're pregnant and looking for support, or a birth worker, my website is the best place that starts to split off in directions that you can learn more. www.blackbirthpros.com is the best place to reach me, send me anything. It's like a choose your own path. You hop on there, it's like, you pregnant? You a birth worker? Okay. So hop on there and then I got you.
Oh, I love it. I love it. And again, thank you so much, Dacia, for
Thank
taking
you.
the time to be on the platform, for sharing your voice and your energy to the viewers. And I truly appreciate the work you're doing. And thank you for accepting the invitation.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Peace and blessings, family. And please share, because the information is valuable as always, and someone needs to hear this. Let's make the connections and make sure that people feel supported within this birthing process. Peace and blessings, family.